The coffee grew cold on the table as Sarah stared out the window of the Anchorage coffee shop, watching snowflakes begin to fall on the bustling street. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the anxiety that had gnawed at her for 3 long years. She clutched a crumpled letter, read dozens of times, bearing the Alaska State Police letterhead. We regret to inform you that the search for your sister, Emma Catherine Morgan, has been officially concluded after 18 months without new developments. Sarah took a deep breath, the icy air burning her lungs. Emma had vanished during a solo backpacking trip in the Chugach Mountains in March 2019. At 28, her younger sister was an experienced hiker and freelance photographer who documented wild landscapes for nature magazines. But something had gone wrong on that trip. Terribly wrong. Sarah's phone vibrated. It was an unknown number with a local area code. Hello? Sarah Morgan? My name is Jake Winters. I'm a park ranger at Chugach National Forest. I think we have something that belongs to your sister. Sarah's heart leaped. What did you find? A digital camera. It was buried in the snow, about 10 miles from her last known location. The unseasonably warm weather this week melted the snow, and well, it would be better if we talked in person. 2 hours later, Sarah was in the ranger station, her chilled hands gripping a Sony Alpha 7R3, the exact model Emma used. The equipment was water damaged, but Jake had managed to salvage some files from the memory card. We recovered about 40 photos and 3 videos, said Jake, a man in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard and weary eyes. Some are disturbing. Are you sure you want to see them? Sarah nodded, though her throat felt as dry as dust. Jake turned on a laptop and opened the first photo. It was a selfie of Emma smiling, with snow-capped mountains in the background. The date stamp read March 15, 2019, 2 days before her last contact. The following photos showed the progression of her trip campsites, stunning landscapes, animal tracks in the snow, but as they progressed, something shifted. The images became darker, the compositions less meticulous. In photo number 23, Emma was nervously glancing over her shoulder. She looked scared, Sarah murmured. That's what we thought too. But wait, it gets worse. The next photo showed footprints in the snow, but they weren't Emma's. They were larger, deeper, and there were at least 3 different sets following her trail. Jake clicked on the next image, and Sarah felt her stomach churn. It was a blurry photo of distant figures among the trees, like shadows watching. Oh my God, Sarah whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. There's more, Jake said softly. The videos. The first video showed Emma in her tent at night, whispering to the camera. This is the 3rd day I feel like I'm being followed. I found signs of an abandoned campsite today, a recent fire, empty cans. There shouldn't be anyone in this area this time of year. I'm changing my route, trying to get to the road faster. The second video was more disturbing. Emma was clearly panicked, filming through the partially opened flap of her tent. Male voices could be heard in the distance, speaking in a language Sarah didn't recognize. The image shook violently as Emma tried to remain quiet. Jesus Christ, Sarah muttered, tears welling up in her eyes. The last video, Jake hesitated. It's hard to watch. The screen showed only darkness for a few seconds, then brightened with the beam of a flashlight. Emma was running through the forest, her breathing audible on the microphone. Branches scraped against her face, and she stumbled several times. Behind her, shouts and voices were approaching. No, 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 she whispered through tears. Please God, no. The image suddenly went black, followed by a dull thud, as if the camera had been dropped. Then silence. Sarah was openly weeping now, her shoulders shaking. Jake gently placed a hand on her arm. I'm so sorry. I know this is awful, but these images give us the first real clue about what happened to Emma. Who were those people? Sarah asked, dabbing her nose with a tissue. We don't know yet, but we will find out. We've sent the files for forensic analysis. They can enhance the audio, identify voices, maybe even figure out what language they were speaking. Sarah looked out the window of the ranger station, watching the snow continue to fall on the unforgiving Alaskan landscape. 3 years of uncertainty, of nightmares, of waking up every morning hoping Emma would appear at the door. And now this evidence that her sister had been hunted, stalked like an animal. "I want to help with the investigation," Sarah said, her voice firmer now. Jake shook his head. "Sarah, I understand your desire for answers, but this is a job for professionals. These mountains are dangerous, and if there are people out there doing this to hikers." "She was my sister, Jake, the only family I had left after our parents died. I'm not going to sit idly by while you investigate." Jake sighed, recognizing the familiar determination in Sarah's eyes, the same he'd seen in Emma when she'd insisted on taking that solo trip against everyone's advice. "But if you're going to get involved, you have to play by my rules. No acting on your own." In the following days, Sarah stayed in a cheap motel in Anchorage while awaiting the results of the forensic analysis. She spent hours studying topographical maps of the area where Emma disappeared, marking possible escape routes and places where someone might hide. At night, lying in the motel's hard bed, she replayed the camera footage repeatedly, searching for details that might have been overlooked. It was on the third night that she noticed something odd. In the second video, when Emma was filming through the tent opening, there was a reflection in the lens, something metallic glinting in the moonlight. Sarah zoomed in on her laptop until she could make out the shape. It looked like a sign, partially obscured by trees. The next morning, she called Jake. "I found something. In the tent video, there's a reflection that looks like a metal sign." "Sarah, we've already analyzed every frame of those videos." "No, Jake, look again. At the 2-minute 15-second mark, left side of the screen. Zoom in." An hour later, Jake called back. His voice was tight. "You were right. It's a sign. The specialists were able to digitally enhance the image. It says private property, Project Aurora, restricted access." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Project Aurora, never heard of it. "Me neither. But I'm going to find out what it is." Jake's research uncovered disturbing information. Project Aurora was an abandoned military research facility from the 1980s, officially decommissioned after the end of the Cold War. Located in a remote area of the Chugach Mountains, it was supposedly used for high-frequency radio communication experiments, but records were sketchy, and much of the documentation remained classified. "Why would an abandoned military installation have guards?" Sarah asked, when Jake shared his findings. "Good question. Theoretically, it shouldn't. The site was officially sealed in 1987. Theoretically. Exactly." Jake obtained the coordinates of the old facility through military contacts. It was about 12 miles from where Emma's camera was found, in an area rarely visited due to the difficult terrain and unforgiving climate. "Let's go there," Sarah said. "Sarah, Jake, my sister encountered these people, or these people encountered her. Either way, it's our only real lead. If you won't come with me, I'll go alone." Jake knew she wasn't bluffing. There was the same fierce determination in Sarah's eyes that Emma had always displayed. "Okay, but we're taking backup and comms equipment, and if there's any sign of danger, we're getting out immediately." 2 days later, Sarah was in a helicopter flying over the Chugach Mountains, accompanied by Jake and 2 armed park rangers. The pilot, a Vietnam veteran named Roy, knew the region better than anyone. Never liked that area. Roy yelled over the roar of the rotor blades. "Something's wrong out there. Animals avoid the place, and it's not uncommon for navigation instruments to go haywire when we get close." Sarah looked out the window, watching the brutal, majestic landscape unfold below. Wherever Emma had been, she'd spent her last moments in these unforgiving mountains. The helicopter landed in a clearing about a mile from the Aurora facility. The group checked their equipment, radios, GPS, emergency supplies, weapons, before starting the trek through the snow-covered forest. The facility gradually appeared through the trees, a collection of low, concrete bunker-like buildings surrounded by a rusty barbed wire fence. Faded signs warned of military property and restricted access, but the fence was breached in several places. "Doesn't look very abandoned," muttered one of the park rangers, pointing to fresh tracks in the snow. Jake radioed Roy, instructing him to remain on high alert for a possible quick evacuation. Then, the group cautiously approached the complex. The first building was empty, just rooms filled with tarped equipment and obsolete, dust-covered machinery. But in the second building, they found signs of recent occupation: empty food cans, sleeping bags, a portable generator that was still warm to the touch. It was in the third building that they found the room that would change everything. It was a kind of control center, with old monitors and communications equipment, but on the walls was something that made Sarah's legs weaken: dozens of photographs of hikers and campers, men and women of various ages, clearly taken without their knowledge. And in the center of the wall, enlarged and printed in high resolution, was a photo of Emma. "Jesus Christ," Jake whispered. Sarah approached the wall, her hands trembling. There were at least 50 different photos, each marked with a date and GPS coordinates. Some dated back 5 years, and in the lower right corner of each photo, there was a red stamp: processed or in progress. Emma's photo was marked processed. "They were hunting people," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "Oh my God, they were hunting people." That's when they heard voices outside. Jake gestured for everyone to hide behind the old equipment. Through a grimy window, Sarah could see 3 men approaching, dressed in military camouflage and carrying rifles. They spoke English, but with accents she couldn't place. "New group arrived yesterday. 3 potential targets camped near the lake. Boss wants us to wait until they're more isolated. Like that girl with the camera, very photogenic, but awfully noisy in the end." Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. They were talking about Emma, about her death. Jake whispered into the radio, requesting urgent reinforcements, but all he got back was static. Roy replied that something was interfering with communications. He couldn't contact base. The men entered the building. Sarah and the group remained hidden as footsteps approached. She could hear her own heart pounding so loudly that she was sure the men could hear it. One of the men stopped at the entrance to the control room. Sarah held her breath. "Someone's been here," the man said in heavily accented English. "Fingerprints on the photos." "Impossible. This place is secure. Take a look yourself." Footsteps approached the wall of photographs. Sarah closed her eyes, bracing herself to be discovered. So Jake did something unexpected and brave. He stood up from behind a console, his hands raised. "FBI," he lied convincingly. "You're surrounded." The 3 men spun their weapons towards Jake. For a terrifying moment, nobody moved. "Where are the others?" asked the leader, a tall man with a scar running down the left side of his face. "Outside. We have this facility completely surrounded." The scarred man smirked coldly. "You don't." That's when everything erupted into chaos. Jake dove to the side as the first shot rang out. The other park rangers emerged from their hiding places, exchanging gunfire with the hunters. Sarah remained crouched, terrified, as bullets ricocheted around the room. During the confusion, she noticed something no one else had seen: a passage at the back of the room, partially hidden by equipment. Without a second thought, she crawled towards the opening. As the gunfire continued, the passage led to a dimly lit underground tunnel. Sarah moved forward, guided only by the weak light of her flashlight. The tunnel smelled of mildew and decay, and the air was heavy and difficult to breathe. After about 300 feet, she reached another room, and what she saw there made her vomit violently. It was a kind of trophy room. On the walls were backpacks, camping gear, clothing, and other personal items from dozens of victims. Sarah immediately recognized Emma's red North Face backpack hanging on a hook. But what completely devastated her was what she found next to the backpack: Emma's diary. With trembling hands, Sarah opened the diary to the last entry, dated March 18, 2019, third day being hunted. "I know I'm going to die here. I managed to hide long enough to write this. Sarah, if you ever find this diary, know that I love you, and that I'm sorry I didn't listen to you when you said this trip was dangerous. These men, They're not normal. They hunt people for sport. I saw human bones at their campsite. Please tell the authorities. Don't let them do this to anyone else. And Sarah, forgive me." Sarah collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. 3 years of hope, of dreams, where Emma was still alive, of possibilities of reunion, all crumbled in a moment of brutal clarity. She was so absorbed in her grief that she almost didn't hear the footsteps approaching through the tunnel. "Found our visitor." Sarah turned to see the scarred man pointing a rifle at her. Behind him, she could hear distant shouts. Jake and the other park rangers were still alive, but clearly in trouble. "You're her sister," the man said, pointing to Emma's backpack. "I can see the resemblance. Same green eyes, same brown hair." She begged at the end, you know, begged for her life, mentioned her sister several times. Sarah felt a cold, pure rage well up inside her, something she had never experienced before.
Why do you do this?
The man smiled. "Why does the hawk hunt the rabbit? It's our nature. Some people are made to be predators, others to be prey. Your sister was a particularly interesting prey, lasted 3 days. A record. You're monsters. We're practical Darwinists, accelerated natural selection." Sarah noticed that the voices from the tunnel had stopped. Either Jake and the others were dead, or they had found another way out. "Get up," the man ordered. "You're going to be our next project." That's when Sarah heard very faintly the sound of helicopter blades in the distance. Roy had called for backup, or was attempting a rescue. The scarred man heard it too. His expression changed. "Looks like your visit will be shorter than planned," he said, adjusting the rifle's aim. Sarah closed her eyes, thinking of Emma, of her parents, of all the things she would never get to do. But then she remembered something Emma always said: "If you're going to die, die fighting." With a swift move, Sarah threw her lit flashlight into the man's face and dove to the side. The rifle fired, the bullet grazing her left ear. She felt warm blood run down her neck as she desperately crawled towards the tunnel exit. The man cursed in a foreign language and fired again, but Sarah had already turned the corner. She ran through the tunnel as fast as her legs would carry her, the sound of heavy boots echoing behind her. When she emerged into the control room, she found Jake and one of the park rangers barricaded behind an overturned table. The other ranger was on the floor, motionless. "Sarah," Jake yelled, "where have you been?" "Tunnel. There's a tunnel. I found Emma's things. You can tell me later. We need to get out of here now." The sound of the helicopter was louder now, and through the windows they could see Roy making an emergency landing in the nearby clearing. But between them and freedom were at least 2 armed hunters, and probably more arriving. Jake made a quick decision, covering fire. "Run for the helicopter when I say so." He and the other ranger started firing through the windows as Sarah ran crouched towards the door. That's when the scarred man emerged from the tunnel, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, where the flashlight had hit him. "The girl is mine," he roared, firing at Sarah. The shot hit Jake in the shoulder, sending him spinning to the ground. Sarah screamed and turned to help him, but Jake furiously waved her on. Go now." Sarah hesitated for a split second, long enough for the scarred man to reload his weapon. She could see in his eyes that he wouldn't miss this time. That's when she heard the most beautiful sound of her life, the roar of multiple helicopters approaching. Through the window, she could see 3 military helicopters descending, soldiers rappelling down, and spreading out across the facility. The scarred man looked to the sky, a look on his face that said, the game was over. He lowered his rifle slightly. "Looks like you got lucky," he said to Sarah, "but this isn't over. We're more than you think, in places you'd never imagine, and we'll always remember you." Before Sarah could respond, he turned the weapon on himself. The gunshot echoed through the facility, momentarily drowning out the sound of the helicopters. Hours later, Sarah was in a military hospital in Anchorage, being treated for exhaustion and minor injuries. Jake was in a bed next to her, his arm in a sling but alive. The other 2 park rangers had survived. The one they thought was dead was only unconscious. A military officer, Colonel Martinez, explained what they had discovered. Project Aurora was never really shut down. It was transferred to a private operation in the 90s. A privatized military contractor running extreme survival exercises for wealthy clients who paid astronomical sums to hunt human prey. Their records show at least 60 victims in the last 10 years. Sarah looked out the hospital window at the distant mountains. Emma was just one of many. Unfortunately, yes, but thanks to her camera and your courage, we were able to expose the entire operation. We've arrested 16 people involved across 3 different countries, and the others, the man said there were more, will continue to investigate, but this particular cell has been neutralized. In the months that followed, Sarah dedicated her life to honoring the memory of Emma and the other victims. She created a foundation to support families of people missing in wilderness areas, and worked as a consultant for law enforcement agencies, helping to identify suspicious patterns in disappearances. Emma's journal was posthumously published, with Sarah's permission, along with a complete documentation of the Aurora case. The book became a bestseller, and the proceeds were donated to search and rescue organizations, but it was the nights that remained difficult. Sarah frequently dreamt of Emma running through the forest, always just a few steps ahead of her pursuers. Sometimes she would wake up screaming, drenched in cold sweat, with Emma's final words echoing in her mind, "Please God, no." And sometimes, on especially dark nights, Sarah wondered how many other predators were still out there, in the vast wilderness of the world, hunting solitary travelers who just wanted to experience the beauty of nature. The answer, she suspected, was far more than anyone would like to admit. A year after the rescue, Sarah received an unmarked letter. Inside was just a photograph, herself leaving the military hospital, with GPS coordinates written on the back, and a message in red ink, "We still remember." Sarah showed the letter to the authorities, but there was never any follow-up. The investigation had been closed, the culprits imprisoned or dead. Officially, the case was closed, but Sarah knew that some hunts never truly end. They just go into hibernation, waiting for the next season. She kept the letter in a locked drawer along with Emma's journal, and the last photo her sister had taken, a selfie smiling at the camera, with the Chugach Mountains in the background, beautiful and innocent, unaware that this would be her last moment of true happiness. And Sarah continued her vigil, knowing that as long as there were predators in the shadows, there would always be a need for someone willing to enter the darkness to bring back those who were lost. Because some stories never truly end, they just get buried in the snow, waiting for someone to find them. And you, dear reader, if this narrative touched your heart and awakened in you the same thirst for stories that explore the darkest mysteries of the human condition, that delve into the depths of psychological suspense and reveal disturbing truths about our society, then I invite you to become a part of this literary journey. Subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell, because each new story we share is a doorway to unexplored universes, a lantern illuminating the darkest corners of the human soul. Don't miss the opportunity to be the first to discover these narratives that question, that disturb, that transform, because the best stories are those that keep us awake at night, reflecting on the mysteries that exist beyond what we see. Your subscription not only ensures that you will never miss a new literary adventure, but also motivates us to continue excavating these buried stories, ready to be discovered by curious souls like yours. The truth, as Sarah discovered, is sometimes buried deeper than we imagine, but there's always someone brave enough to dig.